Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea projecting around 4,500 new cases of COVID-19 on Friday. While new infections have been on a general downtrend, officials still likely to extend social distancing measures in the coming hours. They're concerned about an uptick of cases during the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday. An Asiana Airlines flight, which was grounded in Kazakhstan since last week's unrest flared up, is now back in Seoul. A total of 47 passengers were on board, of which 43 are Korean nationals. Plus, US officials prepare for escalation as talks between NATO and Russia end with no resolution on the border tension around Ukraine. A senior White House official says Russia is banging the drumbeat of war.
Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on January 14th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We are going to start, though, with the COVID-19 situation. South Korea expecting to see a jump in the number of cases for Friday as the decline in infections gradually slows due to the quickening spread of the Omicron strain.
The country is set to begin administering oral COVID-19 pills starting today, and new social distancing guidelines will also be announced. For more on this, our reporter Choi Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
As always, let's start with the local infections.
Again, we're expecting today's tally to be a little higher than what was seen yesterday, once again going above the 4,000 mark. From midnight to 9 p.m. on Thursday, South Korea reported very close to 4,000 cases. This is up by more than 500 cases from the day before and almost 700 cases compared to a week ago. Numbers have been declining for a while now with stronger social distancing measures and the nation's booster shot drive, but it seems the decline is gradually slowing down due to the spread of the Omicron variant. Officials are expecting to see a resurgence in cases, with Omicron likely to become the dominant strain within the next week or two.
Okay, and imported cases continue to hit record highs, and we're hearing that more people who came back to Korea after going to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas have come down with COVID-19.
That's right, Mark. The country has once again witnessed a record-breaking number of imported cases. On Thursday, the country confirmed 391 cases from overseas. South Korea also detected more COVID-19 infections from people returning from CES, which was held in Las Vegas. As of Thursday, a total of 119 attendees were confirmed as positive for COVID-19. According to authorities, Omicron infections have been identified in the pool, and given that the variant represents around 98% of cases in the U.S., it's highly likely the majority of imports from CES are also Omicron. Now, because the majority of overall imported cases are the Omicron variant, authorities have decided to impose stricter quarantine measures for inbound travelers. Starting January 20th, everyone arriving in South Korea must use quarantine buses, trains, and taxis specifically designated for those arriving from abroad. This means these people will not be able to use public transportation, but they will be able to use their own cars. On top of that, those scheduled to arrive in Korea will be asked to submit a negative PCR test taken a maximum of 48 hours ahead of their departure date. Currently, people are required to do this up to 72 hours before departure.
So tougher measures for inbound travelers. But Min-jung, we also touched upon the issue that the oral COVID-19 pills have arrived in South Korea yesterday. What are we expecting now?
Right, like you just said, Pfizer's oral pills have arrived at Incheon Airport yesterday afternoon, and they were delivered to a logistics center in Chungcheongbuk-do province later in the day. The initial batch is enough to treat 21,000 people, and of this amount, 70% have been set aside for nationwide distribution. The delivery began at around 2 a.m. today to around 280 pharmacies as well as 89 residential treatment centers. Facilities will most likely receive the treatments sometime today, and they're also bound to arrive on islands like Jeju by tomorrow. The leftover 30% will be stored at the logistics center, and they'll be supplied to regions that are in more need, perhaps in places that are seeing a surge in cases. The treatments will be administered once they arrive at pharmacies and treatment centers, with priority given to those aged 65 and over and people with weakened immune systems. And when taking the pills, people should take 3 pills at a time, once in the morning and once in the evening. They need to be taken for 5 days, regardless of how symptoms progress.
Okay, so even if someone's feeling better, they still have to take them for the duration of the 5 days. Updated social distancing measures. We're expecting an announcement on that in the coming hours. Do we know what we might be seeing?
Right, like you said, new social distancing measures are set to be announced soon, and we're expecting the measures to be relaxed to a certain extent, but it does seem too soon to expect a lot of easing back. According to a government official, the authorities are considering increasing the number of people allowed for social gatherings from the current 4 to 6 people, but likely with business operations still limited to 9 p.m. These new measures will likely take effect for 3 weeks starting next Monday, considering the Lunar New Year holiday is coming up at the end of January. However, sources say that the government will still leave room to strengthen measures anytime if the virus situation worsens due to Omicron. The government is set to announce plans to tackle the variant and ways to support small businesses today as well.
Right, let's wait for the announcement. Anyway, Min-jung, thank you so much for your report. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, as always. Now, earlier this week, the US imposed new sanctions on North Korean nationals following the regime's recent series of missile launches.
The North has now responded, saying Washington's move will only toughen the North's resolve to shore up its defense capacities. Kim Do-yeon has this report.
North Korea has fired back at the U.S. for its sanctions against North Korean individuals following Pyongyang's series of missile tests. In an interview with the state-run Korean Central News Agency on Friday, a spokesman for the North's foreign ministry said such actions only serve to further stimulate the North to respond even stronger and clearer. The state-run media outlet also said the U.S. needs to respect the North's sovereignty. This comes as U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said North Korea's launches seem to be attention-seeking, which he added is, quote, destabilizing. On Thursday, he appeared on MSNBC saying the North has acted this way in the past and will continue to do so. He revealed that some months ago, Biden administration officials reached out for talks with the North Koreans with no preconditions and no hostile intent toward Pyongyang, but they were rebuffed. Blinken added that the way North Korea is acting right now is dangerous. He also explained that on top of sanctioning the North Koreans, Washington is deeply engaged on North Korea-related issues at the UN and with key partners such as South Korea and Japan. The U.S. ambassador to UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, also urged North Korea to come back to talks. She tweeted, quote, we call on North Korea to refrain from further destabilizing actions, abandon its prohibited weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs, and engage in meaningful dialogue. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Senior defense officials from South Korea, U.S. and Japan talked over the phone Thursday to discuss North Korea's missile launches. Seoul's Deputy Defense Minister Kim Man-gi, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs Eli Ratner, and Kazuo Mazda from the Japanese Defense Ministry exchanged views on the situation on the Korean Peninsula and reaffirmed the importance of trilateral cooperation. The call coming 2 days after the North launched what it claims was a hypersonic missile. The officials agreed to hold trilateral talks at a ministerial level at a later date. A new report says North Korean hackers stole at least $400 million worth of cryptocurrencies in 2021. Chain Analysis, a firm which specializes in tracking cryptocurrency transactions, says North Korean cybercriminals had a banner year in 2021, launching at least 7 successful attacks on crypto exchanges. One of the hacks involved Liquid.com, which lost $91.5 million to the North Korean hackers. The report found 20% of the funds stolen by the regime last year was Bitcoin. The majority at 58% was Ethereum.
An Asiana Airlines flight, which was grounded in Kazakhstan since last week, is now back here in Seoul. According to officials at the Foreign Ministry, the flight, which left Almaty on Thursday afternoon, arrived at Incheon International Airport later that day. A total of 47 passengers were on board, of which 43 are Koreans. The flight had been grounded since last Wednesday, when protesters took control of the area amid unrest over soaring fuel prices. The airport resumed operations on Thursday after Russian military forces intervened. Tensions are mounting between Russia and the West, with the US warning of possible sanctions against Moscow if its military buildup near Ukraine ends up becoming an invasion. The EU has also decided to extend its existing sanctions on Russia. Kim Hye-sun with more.
The U.S. warned of the possibility of imposing toughened sanctions on Russia, saying the drumbeat of war is sounding loud. Speaking on MSNBC Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken threatened massive economic and financial sanctions against Moscow if its huge military buildup across Ukraine's border turns into an invasion. He underscored these sanctions would be something that has never been seen before. America's top diplomat also explained Washington hopes Moscow takes the path of dialogue, again insisting that Russia will face huge consequences if it chooses not to. Russia's deputy foreign minister said in an interview that Russia would neither confirm nor exclude the possibility that it could send military assets to Cuba and Venezuela if its security talks with Western powers fail and U.S. pressure on Russia mounts.
We can no longer retreat. We can already see that there will be other measures, other actions against our opponents if they don't take into account our demands and our needs in the end.
He also explained that it all depends on actions put forth by Washington. Against this backdrop, a third round of talks in Europe in a week aimed at resolving tensions ended in a deadlock. The parties were not able to bridge the gap in the latest talks between Russia and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This comes as ministerial talks between Russia and the U.S. and between Russia and NATO also failed to make clear progress. Following the failures, the European Union has extended economic sanctions against Russia for another 6 months. The EU said the latest measures are part of sanctions first slapped on Moscow in 2014 after it annexed the Crimean Peninsula, adding they are not linked to Russia's latest military buildup. The sanctions, it explained, target Russia's financial, energy, and defense sectors. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Last week, the organisers of the GRAMMYs, the Recording Academy, posted a statement saying that after careful consideration and discussions with city and state officials, health experts, the artist and its partners, it was postponing the 64th Grammy Awards. The reason given, the explosive spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 in the US. It went on to say that the health and safety of those in the music community, the live audience and the people behind the scenes was its top priority, and no new date was scheduled.
BTS, who are nominated for Best Pop Duo Group Performance, were planning on going to the U.S. for the Grammys on January 31st, but canceled the plans after the announcement. For more on the cancellation and the pandemic's effect on show business, we connect to Jamie Rodriguez, the host, producer, and president of J-Rod Concerts Media. Good morning, Jamie.
Hi. Hello, everybody from Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, Jamie, let's start with the interview. So it was disappointing that music fans for the Grammys were indefinitely postponed, but it wasn't quite expected. Were you surprised by the decision, and do you see the organizers pushing ahead with a later date?
No, I think I wasn't surprised. I think that everybody's kind of bracing with this new wave of Omicron for this kind of large-scale event to be postponed. And yes, the Grammys, I expect them to push forward. I mean, ever since their first edition in 1959, they've always found a way through resiliency to eventually happen, including last year, where they were pushed from January to March, and they were done outdoors But yes, the Grammys, I think, will find a way to move forward.
Okay, as you may be aware, we're based in South Korea, so we wanted to talk to you a little bit about K-pop. BTS have enjoyed explosive success, as we all know, in the United States and around the rest of the world. Blackpink also doing very well in the United States. Do you think there is a lot of enthusiasm for K-pop in general? And what do you think, if there are other K-pop bands out there, what is the recipe for success to crack America like BTS have done?
Yes, I mean, first of all, big shout outs to K-pop, and what BTS has done in America has been extraordinary, right? I mean, 3 #1 songs last year, and of course the Grammy nomination this year. But yes, I think that what makes them special is they're so authentic and they're energetic, and they just bring passion every time they're on stage. And Americans love that, whether it doesn't matter what part of the US. I mean, people love authenticity, and that's what BTS delivers. So I think that's always a surefire formula.
And what about the recipe for success? What do you think BTS does right that other K-pop bands could do?
I think, first of all, they're very hard workers. And I think that's here in Nashville, you see that all the time with talent, is that you can have the best voice, you can have the best vocals. But if you don't put the hard work in, the day out, when no one is seeing it, you're not going to get very far. And the guys from BTS, from everything I've heard, they are some of the hardest working people in music. So I think that just bodes well for them and for everybody following.
Well, staying with that, so once the Grammys get rescheduled, do you think BTS could have a good chance of winning, considering the other nominees in their category?
I think BTS has a great chance to win. First of all, they've been making waves and dance in the US for a couple of years, and they are impossible to ignore now. And they are nominated for the Best Pop Duo Group Performance. So I do think they have a great chance to win. I think that it's between them and Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett, just because Tony Bennett is retiring. He just performed his last show. So I think BTS is going against the sentimentality factor of Tony Bennett retiring with Lady Gaga. But I think it's between them two, and I think BTS has a fantastic chance.
Yeah, those are definitely two juggernauts to go up against, Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga, particularly given the fact that Tony Bennett is about to retire. And like you say, Grammys are big on being sentimental and everything. Now, you might say that the Grammys are just not going to be the Grammys if you don't have all the glitz and glamour, the red carpet, the stars there, all the media there and everything. Given that California is among the states in the United States with some of the toughest restrictions in regards to COVID, do you see any possibility where the organisers might say, OK, well, let's up sticks and go to states that have fewer restrictions, somewhere like Texas or Nevada? I mean, just personally speaking, Las Vegas jumps out at me as a perfect location.
Sure. And that's a great question. But yeah, I mean, and the Grammys have been before in places like New York, for example. But at the end of the day, I think that, everyone is kind of like on the same wavelength, whether you're in Nashville, in Florida, in New York or California. I think that the whole industry is like just trying to be safe. Everyone is putting out the health of their family and their friends first and foremost. So if the Grammys have to be a scaled back version like last year, but stay in California, they'll do that. I think that they did a really great job last year, and that's a good footprint. You can be smaller scale, but keep it classy, keep it prestigious, and make the best of the situation, regardless of how this develops.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much for making time with us. Let's hope something could be arranged so that fans could enjoy a proper Grammys. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. The EU's antitrust regulator has vetoed Hyundai Heavy Industries' proposed takeover of its rival Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, citing concerns over a monopoly. The European Commission announced its decision Thursday, saying a merger would create the world's largest shipbuilder with a combined market share of at least 60%. It said such a merger would hurt competition in the construction of large liquefied gas carriers. After reviewing the decision, Hyundai Heavy Industries says it will look into possible countermeasures which may include an appeal to the General Court of the EU. The South Korean government has unveiled plans to support private firms to invest more than $5 billion over the next few years in a bid to grow the country's vaccine industry, and with the ultimate aim of making South Korea a global vaccine hub. More support will also be provided for other growth industries like AI. Min Suk-hyun with this report.
South Korea will spend around $5.3 billion to support companies making facility investments to strengthen the country's vaccine and raw material industries. According to Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi on Thursday, the government plans to develop the vaccine industry as a key sector, just like the semiconductor industry in South Korea. The minister added that the government will continue to support the development of locally produced COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, including antiviral pills. He said the country's first COVID-19 vaccine will be in use in the first half of this year. Hong added that the government will invest around $300 million in new medicine, medical equipment, and in advanced regenerative medicine. This is part of the country's efforts to invest in the next business growth drivers. Earlier, the government designated system semiconductors, next-generation cars, and biohealth, known as the Big Three industries, as key sectors to focus on. The minister stressed that the government will spare no efforts to support those industries.
We will provide maximum support so that large-scale private investment and human resource training can be carried out without delay in the Big Three sectors.
Along with the Big Three, the government will also strengthen several other industries such as data, networks, and artificial intelligence, also referred to as DNA. The government plans to spend more on these sectors and has in fact set aside some $10.2 billion this year, following on from the $8.1 billion spent last year. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Welcome to Dialogue This Week. In this corner, we invite guests from in and out of Korea to talk about a wide variety of issues ranging from culture and sports to the latest trends around the world. Now, Hallyu is the phenomenon of Korean pop culture spreading across borders. In other words, the globalization of the Korean cultural products. From our previous episodes, we largely touched upon various aspects of Hallyu, ranging from K-pop, K-dramas, and even K-food. So today, we're going to touch upon a more calming sector, which is K-literature. Compared to other areas, it seems like K-literature has been rather quiet when it comes to gaining awareness amongst many global audiences, but when we look closer, there were notable achievements. In fact, last year alone, the Literature Translation Institute said that with its help, a total of 180 literary works were translated into 29 different languages, the largest number of works translated in a year since LTI was established. The developments came as several Korean writers like Yoon Go-eun and Ma Young-shin won international awards, and not to mention the rise in demand for translated editions of books by South Korean novelist Han Gang, who won the Man Booker International Prize in 2016, also played a big role. Now, for a more in-depth discussion on this, we have Hye-su Park, author of Understanding Hallyu, the Korean Wave Through Literature, Webtoon, and Mukbang, who is also an associate professor of English at Bellevue College. Good morning, Professor Park. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Professor, in your book, Understanding Hallyu, you explore the less mainstream parts of Hallyu literature, webtoons, and mukbang. So first, I must ask, how did you become interested in Korean literature? And also, as an English professor, how is it different from English literature?
I was born, raised, and educated mostly in Korea, so I grew up reading Korean literature. But as I was doing my graduate studies in the US, I shifted away from Korean literature because I was doing Asian American literature as my focus. So Korean literature has been my recent scholarly interest, and my two most recent books focus on, as you said, Korean media and pop culture, including Korean literature. So to me, Korean literature is scholarly but also personal. It allows me to connect to my identity and roots, and as you can imagine, that's important for me living and working in the US as a Korean. I cannot say Korean literature is very different from English literature other than the language it's written in. Korean literature is definitely part of the world literature, and it has a lot of qualities to become the mainstream of the world literature for sure. But it's just that when I teach Korean literature in the US and introduce it to my students in America, I do take great responsibility and pride for sure. So it's been fun teaching Korean literature.
That's good to hear. Well, the concept of Korean wave first emerged around late 1990s when perhaps with the financial crisis, South Korean media content started spreading to China and Japan and later into Southeast Asian countries. But where on this timeline is Korean literature, and when did it start being translated to other countries, presumably English first?
Korean literature was mostly unknown to the world outside Korea until 1980s. To the best of my knowledge, The Flowers of Fire, which was one of the first anthologies of Korean literature translated to English, was published in 1974. And when it comes to the translation of novel-length individual work, it wasn't until 1985 when the first modern Korean novel was published in the West in English. So the translation of Korean literature has been a fairly recent phenomenon. And I'm pretty sure that translations of Korean literature into languages other than English should be even more recent phenomenon. But I am aware that Literature Translation Institute of Korea has been promoting translations of Korean literature in languages such as German, Spanish, and Polish, and so forth. So as you mentioned earlier, there have been more translations done in recent years. But Korean literature has been introduced to the outside world fairly recently.
Well, Professor, like you said, translation goes beyond just translating words. It's the delivery of the culture as well. So what would you say is the most important factor in translating pop culture? And what do you see as the most different part for literary works, translating literary works?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's not unusual to see, when it comes to the consumption of Korean pop culture, the linguistic commonality seems to be the least important matter. It's not unusual to see thousands of people who have no idea about Korean, shout their hearts out at concerts by Korean boy bands and girl bands. So the language, it doesn't matter for you to become the fans of K-pop and K-dramas and so forth. But the literature is, of course, very different because literature primarily relies on the delicacy, nuance, and specificity of language, right? So when it comes to the globalization of Korean literature, translation becomes an important matter. And as you say, translation is not simply changing one language to the other language. It's a very complicated, multi-layered process. And the act of translation itself has many political, cultural, and social implications. So a lot of people, when talking about how come Korean literature is not as popular yet, they talk about the lack of translators as one of the reasons. And that may be true, although it's a lot more complicated than that. So we do need better and more skilled translators, and recently we have seen good progress in the translation area, but there's still more work to be done.
Right. Well, Professor, like I mentioned in the opening, South Korean author Yoon Go-eun novel The Disaster of Tourists was the first in Korea to win a CWA Dagger Award out of the UK, and Ma Young-shin's graphic novel Moms won the Harvey Award for the Best International Book of the Year. And also, a team of translators was recognized by the US-based Modern Literature Association as they awarded the team for Yisang's selected works. For the first time, the award was given to a work of Korean literature. Now, seeing all these achievements, how is Korean literature being accepted abroad, and what do you think works with the readers?
I think it's easier for me to talk about it in a context of teaching, because that's what I do currently. Korean literature is still less unknown to students and to general public, generally speaking. But as you also mentioned, there have been success cases in Korean translated literature in recent years, including Hangang, Shin Kyung-soo, Kim Young-ha, and so forth. Their works have become really popular. But of course, compared to K-pop, K-drama, or K-film, K-literature is still remaining in a very peripheral status. But I think what's really important is that Hallyu in general is having positive impacts on Korean literature when it comes to people's perceptions of Korean literature. So for example, whenever I offer courses on Korean literature, I make sure to mention K-pop, K-dramas, and K-films in my promotional materials and encourage my students to take my class on Korean literature if they are interested in K-pop and K-drama. And I introduce Korean literature in such a way that reading Korean literature is a way to understand better the culture and society of Korea. So because more people are exposed to Korean culture, whether that's pop culture or not, through K-pop and K-drama and K-films, I see more and more people are becoming more open to learning more about Korean literature. So that is really significant, because Korean literature courses used to struggle a lot to fill the classes, and right now it's a different story. Any classes related to Korea become really popular and viral. So in the larger context, we see Korean literature being part of the Hallyu, the discussion of the Hallyu, in a sense that it is benefiting from the Hallyu phenomenon. But of course, it's difficult to say Korean literature has become the mainstream of the K wave yet.
Well, as you were speaking, I could feel how much you're sincere and enthusiastic about Korean literature. So I must ask, what is your favorite Korean literature piece? And do the Korean language and translated versions speak differently to you?
That's an interesting question. It's really difficult to pick a specific title, but recently I've been working on Hangang's works, The Vegetarian and Human Acts, that are pretty well known. I like her work because her novels, especially those two novels, are aesthetically really rich and complex. And as a literary scholar, it's always exciting to encounter authors who are innovative with the literary forms, styles, and techniques. And I'm also interested in comics, Korean comics, and recently I've taught Anko's Bad Friend that went really well. So these are really great examples of Korean literature that have been receiving favorable responses in the U.S. and many other transnational locations of the world. And yeah.
Well, I must have a look at them too. Well, Professor, literature has a rather particular audience, perhaps a narrower following than music, films, or sports. But would you say Korean literary work qualifies to be part of the Hallyu?
Of course, it qualifies in a sense that, as I mentioned earlier, in a sense that, Korean literature can be beneficial in the context of a Hallyu. But again, it's slightly difficult to say, K literature is becoming a major part of a Hallyu just yet. And I think there are many reasons for that. And of course, the translation is one reason, which I talked about briefly. But another thing to consider when it comes to Korean literature and Hallyu is the medium specificity. And what I mean by that is that the ways in which Korean literature is circulated and consumed are very different from the ways in which, say, K-pop and K-drama are circulated. K-pop and K-drama can be easily digitized and circulated by a wide range of audience at any time and places, and often at little to no cost. And they often go viral online, and that virality in the online space plays a crucial role in terms of advertising, marketing, and promoting Korean popular culture. But literature still relies primarily on traditional print medium, so it cannot be digitized and circulated as readily and rapidly. So I think that's one of the big hurdles that Korean literature faces currently. But of course, we are living in a world where the technology changes day by day. And I feel that the modality of Korean literature could change in the future, where it can be circulated just as K-pop and K-drama, and they could have a huge impact on the globalization of Korean literature.
Now, Professor, let's shift our focus to webtoons. So webtoons are perhaps slightly different in the sense that they are more visual and have more exposure, as they've been adapted to many Korean dramas like Itaewon Class and Netflix's Sweet Home, and most recently Hellbound, which was another huge hit. Now, again, the Hallyu popularity spectrum, where do you see webtoons? Where do you think it stands?
Webtoon is huge, actually, and I'm very surprised that not many people talk about Webtoon. I've recently written about Webtoon, and as I was writing my book, I learned more about the popularity of Webtoon and its larger impact, and I was pretty impressed. Webtoon, like for example, Naver, one of the largest search engine in Korea, launched its global Webtoon service, Line Webtoon, in 2012. And in just 2 years, in 2014, they acquired 18 million global readers. And that's a significant number within such a short period of time. So Webtoon's popularity is pretty phenomenal. But as you mentioned too, what's also really interesting about webtoons is the fact that webtoons are often adapted into other pop cultural content such as dramas and films, and they become popular globally. So webtoons are important not by themselves, but they are important precisely because they lead to other cultural contents.
All right. Now, Professor, we have lots to talk about, but just I think we're running out of time. So before we let you go, our last question, I'm curious, is Korean literature just taking longer to become as popular as K-pop, K-dramas, or K-beauty, or should we be looking at it in a different way?
I think we have to look at it in different ways, again, because of the issues of translation and circulation that other Korean popular cultural contents are not facing, right? So Korean literature has extra hurdles to overcome. But I think what's important is the fact that K-wave in general is having positive impacts on Korean literature. So I think the timing is right to globalize Korean literature, and it is the time for us to think more actively about how to make Korean literature a more major part of the K-wave. So I think we really need to capitalize on the K-wave and Hallyu in order to make Korean literature more significant in the global setting.
All right, Professor Park, I heard that it's quite late from where you're located now. Thank you so much for making time for us. I wish you all the luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Moving on now, South Korea has one of the fastest growing digital technology markets in the entire world. Since the pandemic, QR codes have been at the center of these new developments. Shin Ye-eun reports.
Nowadays, it's hard to live in Korea not learning how to use this. A QR code. This code is needed almost everywhere, from hospitals and banks and restaurants to even traditional markets.
This is mostly because of the pandemic. South Korea built the world's first blockchain-based COVID-19 vaccination verification system. The system, known as KUV, proves people's vaccination status and is used as a vaccine pass. While these passes are needed almost everywhere, not everyone finds them easy to use.
To scan a QR code, you need to be able to see, but blind people can't do this, so they can't even visit a hairdresser. There needs to be an alternative option for them, like installing a machine that the blind can just place their phones on and the scanning happens automatically.
Seniors aren't as familiar with learning how to use such technology, so we've been providing free outreach programs where we teach them how to scan a QR code and show their vaccine passes at different venues.
While there are some hurdles still left to tackle, more and more industries are developing QR codes. Like the CEO of a startup I talked to, who has been trying to make every transaction possible with the scan of a QR code.
QR codes do much more good than harm for both business owners and customers. For customers, it's easier. They just need to scan a QR code to pay. Businesses also save a lot of money on credit card commission fees.
The district of Yongsan-gu has thought up a clever way to help tourists. They made a QR map. A scan of a QR code opens up a VR screen, which shows what each attraction and site has to offer before tourists go see for themselves.
Originally, I would have to ask my friends or search online to find out which locations are the best to visit. But this QR map allows me to see what different locations look like before I've even arrived at the district.
Already a pioneer in digital technology, South Korea is set on making even more improvements to its QR code system. Shin Yeun, Arirang News.
Now, a video for the song Baby Shark has become the first to reach 10 billion views on YouTube, produced by South Korean entertainment company Pinkfong. Baby Shark Dance, a short clip of the dance moves from the song, the one you're watching now, reached the milestone on Thursday afternoon here in Korea. Originally released back in June of 2016, it became the most watched clip on YouTube last year with over 7 billion views, but now has more than 10 billion. Baby Shark is known the world over by children, teachers and parents alike. Now, it's sad to say, but even in 2022, it's usually challenging for disabled people to fully appreciate things like going to the theatre or taking in a musical. In a bid to help them, theatres and technological institutions here in South Korea are working on ways to ensure that they get greater access so they're able to enjoy these performances. Our cultural correspondent Kim Bok-young with this report.
How do you enjoy concerts or the theater if you couldn't hear? Not everyone can enjoy the cultural events that we take for granted. The Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute has come up with an innovative gadget, a wearable tactile tone system that delivers the tone of an instrument in the form of vibrations. This allows the hearing impaired to enjoy music. The wearable glove converts the sound frequencies into tactile patterns. It has been used in real 국악 performances, allowing hearing-impaired audiences to experience tunes of Korea's bamboo instrument daegum.
이 진동이라는 느낌이 박자와 딱 맞게 떨어진다는 것을 깨닫게 되고 그것을 마음으로 느끼게 되고 더 내용을 풍성하게 느꼈습니다.
The developers say this technology could be used for educational purposes.
People with hearing impairments do not have experience of hearing tunes, so it is hard for them to sing. If they use this system, they would be able to enjoy music like we do and learn pitches and tones educationally.
Yet innovative gadgets cannot realize their purpose if they are not readily used in real venues. Knowing this, the state-run theater company has introduced systems to improve accessibility for the disabled by offering sign language interpretations by interpreters on stage, subtitles, and audio or screen descriptions.
Compared to interpretations for news, those for the art sector are much more difficult because we need to translate while subtly delivering context. We need to think about the intentions of the production team and actors.
It is important to have that will to enjoy the show together with those with disabilities before thinking about whether it is possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. What matters is to do what we can right now.
The National Theatre Company of Korea says it will continue pushing the boundaries so more groups of people can enjoy its shows.
People with different conditions all have the right to enjoy culture. And as a state-run company, we need to offer that. We're providing more pieces with services and making it the basic minimum.
Like how crashing the 1-inch barrier of subtitles could lead to new experiences, crashing other barriers could help the disabled access a whole unexplored world. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Queen Elizabeth II on Thursday revoked Prince Andrew's military titles as well as his royal patronages a day after a federal judge rejected Andrew's attempt to block a civil suit regarding a sexual abuse allegation. According to a statement from Buckingham Palace, his titles have been returned to the Queen and the Duke of York will not undertake any public duties. He will defend the ongoing case as a private citizen. The move also comes just hours after a group of 150 military veterans called for the Queen to remove Andrew's military titles in an open letter. The 61-year-old is currently facing a civil suit in the U.S. from an alleged victim of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who claims Epstein trafficked her to Andrew when she was under the age of 18. A royal source says Andrew can no longer use the title, His Royal Highness, in any official capacity, and his other roles will be distributed among other members of the royal family. At least 5 people are dead and dozens other injured after a passenger train derailed on Thursday in the eastern Indian state of West Bengal. According to officials, 12 of the passenger train's coaches became derailed while 3 capsized. While the cause of the accident is currently being investigated, the government plans to provide financial compensation to families of the deceased and all of the injured.
Bikaner-Guwahati Express got derailed between New Domohani and New Moinagudi at around 5 p.m. today. Railways has already announced an ex gratia amount of 5 lakhs for the families of the deceased and 1 lakh in case of severe injuries. 25,000 in case of minor injuries.
Accidents are unfortunately common on India's massive but aging railway network. The state-run railway system operates 9,000 passenger trains and carry about 23 million passengers daily. In 2016, 127 people were killed when 14 coaches derailed in one of India's worst train accidents. SpaceX on Thursday launched a 2-stage Falcon 9 rocket, carrying 105 small satellites into low orbit around the Earth. The Transporter 3 mission lifted off at 10:25 a.m. local time from the Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The latest launch of the reusable rocket is part of the company's SmallSat rideshare program, which provides access to space for small satellite operators seeking a reliable, affordable ride into orbit. Thursday's launch also marks the company's 3rd rideshare mission using the U.S.-based rocket. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Korea is experiencing a deep freeze again this morning. Morning temperatures in Seoul is about minus 10 degrees Celsius, and of course it's colder in northern parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeonggi-do. But it's about time we get some relief from these cold temperatures with rise in highs this afternoon. Freezing and dry start to the day in the capital as a dry alert has been issued since yesterday. The East Coast stays dry. In fact, Busan has been under dry alert for 27 consecutive days. Avoid any activities that involve fire or sparks. Lingering snow in Ulleungdo, Dokdo, and mountainous regions of Jeju should let up in the morning, and we can expect sunny skies nationwide today. Sub-zero readings for most parts, even Busan is about at -5 degrees Celsius this morning. Highs in Seoul will finally go up to positive territory at 1 degree. Daegu, Gwangju topping out at 5 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Well, there will be a bit of winter precipitation from tomorrow afternoon in the capital. Then another bout of freezing weather returns next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. Mark and I will be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Monday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. Have a great weekend. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
Yes, have a wonderful couple of days off. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for joining us. We'll be back next week. Until then, goodbye.